we go. All right, good morning, everyone. Today is Sunday, September the 20th, 2020. And today we are going to be talking about human origins and the nature of God. We're going to read from Psalm 90 and from John chapter 1. And if you want to get your Bibles ready, and I said message there, but I'm actually going to read from both the NIV and the message for both verses. And we're going to be talking about chapter 2 of this book by Dr. John C. Lennox called 2084, a very, mild and light title, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Humanity. So last week, we actually did a check-in first, and the lesson was too long, and we didn't have time for joys and concerns. So today, right after our opening prayer, we'll pause the recording and we're going to do joys and concerns, and then we'll have announcements, our big question, and we'll read our Bible verses and then have some quotations from the chapter. And I hope that, and I'm pretty sure we will, because I'll cut down the quotes if we need to leave about 10 minutes at the end of class to have a little discussion and talking. So, and we'll not record our joys and concerns or our table talk portion. But before I pray, I thought I would mention that there have been some exciting headlines in the news lately about the planet Venus. And this last week, there was an excited group of scientists that published an article and reported that they detected this chemical called phosphine in the clouds of Venus, which I am no chemist, but as I've read some of these articles, apparently phosphine is something that is created in large quantities by microbial life and by organic life. It is something that lightning, volcanoes, and other kinds of inorganic interactions can cause in small quantities, but they think with these Earth-based telescopes, they've detected that in large quantities, and so that is a sign of possible life. And if you don't use Google News, one of the things I really do like is to put a topic like this, and then they have a little button called full coverage, and so it has a whole spectrum of different news sources that are mainstream media sources. These aren't people out of their garage, writing articles, but it has things from a large political spectrum, and then also some international coverage as well. So that was pretty interesting. And then this morning, as I was shaving so that I was presentable this morning for our recording, I asked my Google Home smart speaker to tell me the news about Venus. And it said, lo and behold, and I got multiple articles, this one is from Popular Mechanics, that Russia has now claimed to own the planet Venus. They announced this last week. A leader of the Russian, a commercial Russian group called Roscosmos. And so there is a space treaty in 1967 which prevents countries from owning any other rocky body in the solar system. But Russia has decided that Venus is theirs. I do not know if that is related to the the scientific announcements that happened earlier, but pretty interesting that these things were announced this last week. So what I thought I would use for our opening prayer is a picture of the planet Venus. And if I can pull up my speaker notes here, these two pictures are actually from 1974. So this was taken by our orbiter Mariner 10 on February 7th and 8th, 1974, a couple days after the spacecraft's closest approach to Venus on February 5th. And I'll just read you, this is from JPL of NASA, and this is what it says about these images. As it sped away from Venus, NASA's Mariner 10 spacecraft captured this seemingly peaceful view of a planet the size of Earth wrapped in a dense global cloud layer. But contrary to its serene appearance, the clouded globe of Venus is a world of intense heat, crushing atmospheric pressure, and clouds of corrosive acid. This newly processed image revisits the original data with modern image processing software. A contrast-enhanced version of this view, also provided here, makes features of the planet's thick cloud layer visible in greater detail. So I think the left version is the one that we saw in 1974, and then they've applied these new image processing techniques to be able to see a little more detail. It says the clouds seen here are located about 40 miles above the planet's surface, at altitudes where Earth-like atmospheric pressures and temperatures exist. However, they are comprised of sulfuric acid particles as opposed to water droplets or ice crystals. The cloud particles are mostly white. However, patches of red tinted clouds also can be seen, and this is believed to be due to the presence of a mysterious material that absorbs light at blue and ultraviolet wavelengths. Many chemicals have been suggested for this mystery component, from sulfur compounds to even biological materials, but a consensus has yet to be reached among researchers. I don't know if that has to do with this phosphine that they talked about this last week. It says the clouds of Venus whip around the planet at nearly over 200 miles per hour, 100 meters per second, circling the globe in about 4.5 days. These hurricane force winds cover nearly the entire planet. That they do is another unexplained mystery, especially given that the solid planet itself rotates very slow. It rotates about 4 miles per hour, where the Earth rotates about 1,000 miles per hour. The winds and clouds also blow to the west, not the east, as in Earth. This is because the planet Venus rotates to the west, backward compared to Earth and most of the other planets. As the clouds travel westward, they also typically progress toward the poles. This can be seen in the Mariner 10 view as a spiral curved pattern at mid-latitudes near the equator. Instead of long streaks, areas are more clumpy. Discrete clouds can be seen, indicating enhanced upwelling and cloud formation. And it talks a little bit more about this and says it was from 1974. So as we think about science and faith and God and creation, isn't it amazing that we have this opportunity to have telescopes that, of course, Galileo had them hundreds of years ago, but now can see so much more. And we're actually sending probes and have sent probes, to these planets. And as a result of this announcement this last week, NASA is evidently thinking about possibly speeding up, missions to Venus, ways that we could be orbiting the planet and examining it closer, but also penetrating the planet and sampling from the clouds that are there, and just how amazing it is to have this deeper glimpse into the universe and into our solar system specifically. And of course, with that announcement that, Russia might decide to own Venus, it raises ethical questions about what kinds of things that we will do as human beings, with our universe and the places that we go. So with that being said, let's open up with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity that you give us to come together virtually, but in your name, and with the explicit purpose, Lord, of opening up your word and inviting you, God, to speak to us, inviting your Holy Spirit to speak to us and communicate to us, Lord, to help us to grow in our knowledge and understanding of you, helping us to grow in faith, and Lord, convicting us to know the ways in which you call us to live, the path that you want us to follow, and the choices that you want us to make, Lord. We give you thanks for your amazing creation, for the opportunities that we have to glimpse your glory and your majesty. And I pray that you would speak to us in this time. It's in your Son, Jesus' name, I pray. Amen. Okay, so with that, I'm going to click the pause button. All right. So a few announcements. I don't know actually what the best way remotely to stay in touch with the church. I've mentioned the church's app before. Facebook definitely has some things. I found a couple things on Facebook that were shared this last week as far as announcements. For those with kids, our church is giving these takeout boxes, which are kind of fun for activities and things like that for the kids to do at home. The gathering actually renewed this last week, and so there are classes and opportunity to share a meal together at the church, and dinner starts at 5:15, and then the classes are going from 6:30 to 7:30. I know there was a group that we had been a part of last year that is continuing to just kind of meet outside and meet in the playground and some different areas. So not all the classes are necessarily meeting inside the church, but those are good things. And if you don't follow the church on Facebook. That is one way, in addition to the mobile app, to be staying up to date. I wanted to just real briefly tell you all about this, and I think I probably will just give a little more information about this week to week, because this is something that really everybody at the church needs to know about. And because of our transition with Dave Moore leaving and other kinds of things, I don't know that we have pushed out a lot of this information. But as of January 1, the entire church is now on this new information system that's not RDS. And that may be an acronym that causes nightmares for prior members of the church who may be on the call. Anyway, it was a system that we had forever, and it is really a wonderful upgrade. But what it means is that every one of us who's a member of the church right now can log on. And so this is the web link. I'll also email this to you separately, but you can go to onrealm.org and you can click that little link that says reset password, and then you can set a password for yourself so that you can log in. Why, you might ask, would you want to do this? Well, among other things, for Sunday school now, last year I used the Google Classroom along with putting stuff online. This year, I'm basically just putting things here in Realm and then also sharing it to our Facebook group and online. So there's still a couple places, but any groups that you're a part of, small groups, if you are a former deacon or elder, a current church officer, a member of a different small group. All these have organizations inside. And so you can do some things, and I'll talk more about this, in terms of the notifications, how much email you want to receive or not receive from the church, updating your information, but also staying in touch. And so I have been using, just the last couple weeks, a feature where I can post to our wall, because we have a subcategory here for our Sunday school class, Jesus and Science. And so you can go back and see those things. And you can also reply and see what other members have posted, etc. So anyway, our website Realm, connected to all of our church's information system. And if you're interested, it's available, and it's something that we can each log into. And again, depending upon your involvement with different groups and things like that. And if you're a leader of a group, by the way, and you'd be interested in learning some more about that, last spring I did a short session for church leaders, a little bit about that in terms of using the messaging options and communications options. And just let me know if you want more information about that. All right, so here's our big question for today. We're going to talk about chapter 2 of this book. And I originally said, what do we know? And I changed the word know to believe. That's an interesting thing to think about. But about two different things. What do we believe about the origins of life and about the nature of God? This book and the PBS special that we talked about the first half of last time, discussing artificial intelligence and the question of whether or not human beings are going to be able to create a general artificial intelligence, not just a specialized artificial intelligence that can learn and get better and do a specific thing like driving a car or driving a truck. That's an example of a specialized artificial intelligence. But this idea of a general artificial intelligence would be whether, like a human brain, and actually whether or not computers are going to exceed human cognitive capacity. We are limited in the size of our prefrontal cortex, which is, we understand, the part of our brain that allows us to do higher order thinking and the higher order stuff that we're thinking about, problem solving, and doing all kinds of engineering and thinking about things that are not just, basic, instinctual sorts of things. There is not a limit to how many computers can be stitched together. Computers just keep on getting faster and faster. And so there is this question about whether or not, scientists are going to be able to do that. And if they do, are the creators of those algorithms and programs going to have ethics inside the system or not? And so we're going to read a couple Bible verses, and we're going to open up to Psalm 90. First of all, I'll be reading from the NIV version, and then I'm going to read the Message, and then we're going to read the first 5 chapters of the Gospel of John as well. So I can't think of this without thinking of Matt Holtzman, who is the director of contemporary music at our church in Lubbock at Westminster Presbyterian Church in Lubbock. That's where Shelley and I met. back in 1995. And so anyway, this is the initial 2 verses of Psalm 90 from the NIV. Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations, before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world. From everlasting to everlasting, you are God. We get a clear idea from this verse that God does not have a beginning or an end. From everlasting to everlasting is forever, without start, without ending. And if we read the Message version of these verses from Psalm 90, this is what we read. God, it seems you've been our home forever, long before the mountains were born, long before you brought the earth itself to birth. From once upon a time to kingdom come, you are God. And this is subtitled A Prayer of Moses, a Man of God. So that's Psalm 90. I put a link in here to this song. This is not on like Spotify or Apple Music, but this picture over here on the right, Shelley and I with Matt Holtzman and his wife Brooke, they're at First Pres Colorado Springs right now, and he's their director of, I don't know what his exact title is. He actually just completed seminary. But when we were in Lubbock, we had a program for college ministry called Late Night, and they recorded an album, and it's called Late Night Ministries, with All My Soul. And so the first title song there is Psalm 90. So if we were meeting face to face, I would probably have had that song, playing in the background, because it's just those scripture verses set to music. So this was about, the picture there was about 3 years ago when our family was in Colorado and had a chance to attend service and got to see Matt. So the other verse I'd like to read, or verses I'd like to read, are the first 5 verses from the Gospel of John. And again, this is the NIV. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The same 5 verses from the Message by Eugene Peterson, subtitled The Life Light. The Word was first, the Word present to God, God present to the Word. The Word was God, in readiness for God from day one. Everything was created through him. Nothing, not one thing, came into being without him. What came into existence was life, and the life was light to live by. The life light blazed out of the darkness. The darkness couldn't put it out. And I chose these verses because as we take a look at some quotations from chapter 2 of this book, Lennox gets to the heart of where we came from. That's what this chapter 2 is about. Did we just come out of random darkness and blackness in some scientific process that had nothing to do with the creator or any kind of prime mover? Did we just spontaneously leap out of the void? Or did a creator, did God, in a mysterious way that we have insight into, but we could not completely understand, fashion us and bring us forth out of nothingness? And, Lennox is a Christian. He is a Jesus follower, a Jesus believer, and he believes that the latter, this wasn't just some accident that happened. And so he connects this to this idea of artificial intelligence. And I wanted to put a Star Trek picture up here. My wife is the big Star Trek fan in our house. She has, got me watching a few Star Trek movies. I'm definitely not anywhere close to her number of episodes watched on all the different, series. But I put it up here because, the depictions that we have of science and technology, and I'd even say culture, in terms of vision of peaceful coexistence of people from different backgrounds and different races, working together, that shapes our perceptions in powerful ways. And this chapter by Lennox is really a critique of a very popular and well-known author whose books have been made into movies. And I don't think this particular book has been made into a movie yet. But really, Lennox is offering this chapter as a rebuttal to his assertion about some of the assertions that he makes about science, and also the origin of life itself and where we come from. And so before sharing a couple quotations, let me just give you a broad outline. If you haven't picked up the book, I'd encourage you to do this. The chapters aren't long. They're about 20 pages long each. And for the most part, we're going to be taking a chapter per week this fall. 2 weeks ago, we did mapping out the territory. We actually took, I guess, 2 weeks to kind of do that. And then we're talking about a video. We're going to talk about that PBS video, the second half of it, next week. But this week we're on chapter 2 called The Big Question, Where Do We Come From? The next chapter is going to be Where Are We Going? And then he's going to talk about, he's using the word narrow in terms of specialized, but in chapter 4 and chapter 5, this idea of narrow artificial intelligence, but he's going to kind of do the yin and the yang of that, the positive and the negative, just like we did see in that PBS special, and possibly, self-driving cars. That may be an example, or being able to identify breast cancer much earlier and therefore have a much greater chance of being able to get rid of that cancer and prevent that cancer. But then there's the dark side in terms of surveillance and surveillance capitalism, these kinds of things. So the 6th chapter is talking about upgrading humans, the idea of a transhuman, where there are people who are literally putting chips in their brains. And I'll talk to you briefly today about Neuralink, which is the Elon Musk company, where they're developing a brain interface for the computer that's actually being put into the human skull. And there was a video that was released a couple weeks ago where they've been doing testing with pigs and having success with that. Chapter 7 is then making the move from the specialized, or what's called narrow AI, to general intelligence, which is this idea of a human cognition capability, or something better than human, more capable than what we could do as human beings. So chapter 8 is the Genesis files. What is a human being? In chapter 9, we'll talk about moral sense and the origin of morality. Chapter 10 is the true Homo Deus. 11 is future shock, the return of the man who is God. And then Homo Deus and Revelation and the time of the end, or the end time. So that's kind of where we're going as far as this book and these chapters. The novel that this chapter 2 is a response to is this one by Dan Brown. And has anybody read this book? Because I've read Inferno and I read the Da Vinci Code. I watched the Da Vinci Code. Dan Brown is a very, very popular novel writer, thriller, mystery novel. And this is the 5th in this installment of the Robert Langdon series. And I don't know. I guess I probably should have read it before today's lesson to fully, understand the perspectives that are being shared here. But his book here about origin has to do with the origin of humanity and the origin of not just humanity, but life on Earth. And so interestingly, if you Google something, and I just Googled Dan Brown origin, because that's the name of his book and that's the author's name, Google will have these different things of what people also search for. And so one of those things is Dan Brown origin true? So there's a lot of folks, I guess, searching for that. And this is what Google says about this. Brown claims factual accuracy in origin by including a, quote, fact page in the preface that reads, quote, all art, architecture, locations, science, and religious organizations in this novel are real. Well, apparently everyone does not agree. One of the things that this book, the Dan Brown's book, points to, which is a real study, was an October 28, 2008 edition of Science that published a study called the Miller Volcanic Spark Discharge Experiment. And I remember seeing this in science class in Manhattan, Kansas, back in the late 80s when I was in high school. where they had this sort of bubbling cauldron of stuff. And this was the idea that if you could get the basic building blocks of life together and you could stir them up in a cauldron and then put in a spark, a bolt of lightning, a spark of electricity, boom, what was going to happen? And they're trying to replicate those. So what that original, experiment showed was that out of that cauldron of scientific ingredients could come some amino acids, and amino acids are more complex building blocks of life than basic elements. But you didn't get DNA. And so he's got several different quotations here. This one is from one of the authors of the original study, Jeremy England, who is with MIT. And he said this in the Wall Street Journal in October of 2017. He says, this is quoting Jeremy England, "There's no real science in the book to argue over. I'm a scientist, but I also study and live by the Hebrew Bible. To me, the idea that physics could prove that the God of Abraham is not the creator or ruler of the world reflects a serious misunderstanding of both the scientific method and the function of biblical text." And we talked about this in our class last year, that just because we have the scientific explanation for processes doesn't mean that we can leap to these questions that really we have to rely on faith and religion to answer. That's what he's saying here, that science is not capable of disproving an explanatory matrix that sees confirmation of the activity of a creator in what we find in nature. There's some other folks quoted here. James Tour, a professor of chemistry, nanotechnology, and computer science at Rice University in Houston, says that chemistry invalidates the claims that Brown makes. Again, Brown is a popular writer, very popular, putting this out into mainstream culture. And he is saying the science is real. And so what Tour is saying here is that, information, and that basically we understand now is to be DNA about how life forms and how these different organisms and organic life develop. It had to come from somewhere, and there's no chemical experiment or evidence to suggest that DNA just, the instructions for cellular reproduction just spontaneously appear. We talked a lot last year about the human genome, and so I thought it might be good to just have a little quick review
Hey, Wes,
about. Yes, sir.
can I ask a question on this?
Yes, you can.
When you say he says the science is real, are we to assume that means he believes that it's factual, it's correct?
Dan Brown is presenting the idea that if you mix up these chemicals, DNA jumps out, and so all these instructions for life just spontaneously happen, and that has been scientifically proven. That's what he's basically making as the thesis of his book, is that there's no need for God, that there is no God, because all you need to do is mix these chemicals up and you get everything that we see for life. So that's kind of what he's saying, that the science is, the argument that our author is making about the science being wrong is that jump is not scientifically supported. And even the people who wrote this research say that as well. We have not done the 23andMe or the Ancestry.com or whatever when you send your DNA off. I mentioned, I think last year in our class, my sister, who's adopted, did that, and really miraculously, is an amazing God thing. Her birth mother had registered with the same company months before. They were reunited and met each other for the first time. My sister, was born in 1977. And so last year, they were reunited in Colorado Springs, absent the testing and doing that DNA procedure, they wouldn't have found each other. And they both wanted to be found. That was one of the things too. DNA is incredible. 3.2 billion bases of DNA, base pairs in the human genome. The billions of instructions that each one of us has inside every single one of our living cells. that dictates quite a bit in terms of how we look and the ways that we have developed and the ways we act. Not everything, right? There's a nature nurture side of this, and that's part of the morality and the ethics that we're going to be talking about, because we don't believe as Christians, and many moral philosophers don't believe either, that everything is strictly chemistry. We have this ability to make moral decisions, and in some cases to decide to do things, to sacrifice ourselves, or to make sacrifices that don't make, instinctual sense in terms of just trying to survive and, keep our DNA line or whatever, our family, living longer. This is a quotation I shared from Francis Collins' book, The Language of God, that we read last year. And this is basically Collins saying, hey guys, don't worry, because even though we've mapped the human genome, he says this: there's plenty of divine mystery left. Many people who've considered all the scientific and spiritual evidence still see God's creative and guiding hand at work. And this is answering for himself. He says, for me, there's not a shred of disappointment or disillusionment in these discoveries about the nature of life. Quite the contrary, how marvelous and intricate life turns out to be, how deeply satisfying the digital elegance of DNA, how aesthetically appealing and artistically sublime are the components of living things. And he goes on to talk about why he continues to be a person of faith, even understanding all of this about DNA. So here are some of the other things in our text with respect to Dan Brown and this idea of, whether life could just suddenly jump out of chemistry. He says there's no evidence that DNA, the building blocks of life, or the language of God, can come from a mindless, unguided process. This is Tour, the same scientist, speaking again. He says, we synthetic chemists should state the obvious. The appearance of life on Earth is a mystery. We are nowhere near, in science, to solving this problem. The proposals offered thus far to explain life's origin make no scientific sense. And then this is a paragraph talking about how, science is in many ways descriptive of patterns and regularities, but it's not causal. It's not creating things. Understanding Newton's laws of motion can help us understand, how planetary bodies and really any kind of matter at a macro level, interacts. But it doesn't give us this idea of the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang. Like, where did that come from? How did things get set into motion? So Brown is arguing that there is no God explicitly. And we've heard before, and you've probably maybe heard of too, Richard Dawkins, one of the foremost atheists and God deniers, and his book, The God Delusion, is saying that, you have all these laws, then you don't have a creator. And what our author here is saying is that, according to the biblical worldview, there is not a beginning time for God. God is eternal. God didn't have a starting point. He didn't have an ending point. He always has been, and he always will be. Donald Knuth, one of the fathers of computation, a Christian, said, I think of people who write programs, they do have a glimmer of extra insight into the nature of God, because creating a program often means that you have to create a small universe. And so this is where we kind of link this up to artificial intelligence and programming and the ways in which algorithms are being created, because this is what the author says: the suggestion that DNA was created by an intelligence is dangerous not only to atheism, is dangerous only to atheism, not to science. Where do ethics come from? Is it something that originates with God, with our creator? Or, is it just chemical? These questions are pretty important, especially as we're creating these computer algorithms and programs that have a lot of power over us and over our society and decisions that get made. And so this is the last paragraph of this chapter, chapter 2. Langdon, who's the main protagonist of this series by Dan Brown, has this suggestion at the end, really opening the door for faith and for belief. And so the statement for science has indeed got rid of the God of the gaps types of religions of the ancient Greeks that stood in the way of science, but science has not gotten rid of God, the creator, the upholder of the universe. We talked about that phrase last year a bit, where we don't want to situate our faith on this idea of just God of the gaps, the things that I can't understand. Well, then that has to be God. God is mysterious and he is beyond our complete understanding. But just because we understand more about DNA now, the advance of science in that way doesn't mean that God shrinks and gets smaller. And a God of the gaps approach to believing in God would say, I don't know what the northern lights are, therefore it has to be God. Now that we know there are these, ions that are being sent off from the sun by the solar wind, and they interact with the magnetosphere of the earth. You know, that's a fundamental idea that I think a lot of people continue to get wrong when it comes to science and faith, in thinking that the more and more we know about science, the smaller and smaller God has to be. And that is not the belief that a lot of folks have. And I think a lot of Christians would put themselves in that category as well, that our God doesn't get smaller just because now we have greater insight into the clouds of Venus and what the composition of them might be. Our awe can actually be deepened by seeing those things, because that's not the basis of our belief in God, is ignorance of different kinds of processes. So let me mention two things and then give us some talk time, and I'm gonna pray us out. There's a great YouTube original series which I discovered in the last 2 weeks with the same title as that PBS special. It's called In the Age of AI. And so this link is in the slideshow. You can use a smartphone to scan that. There's 9 videos in the series. It is narrated by Robert Downey Jr., who, if you are a fan of the Avengers and the Marvel, series, he's Iron Man. In fact, some people think that his character was sort of modeled off of Elon Musk. It's interesting parallels. But this is a very interesting exploration into these same kinds of issues. And so I want to commend that to you. And it might be that I'll use some video clips from this as well in our class. I actually just watched the first episode this last week, but it's excellent. It's 9 parts. The other thing that,
will you be sending us that link?
yes, I'll send you that link broken out from the slideshow. It's here in the slideshow, but I'll send it separately. The other one I want to mention to you, I watched this week, and this is from August 28th. CNET did this. Elon Musk has this whole company called Neuralink. And so this was a long presentation where they had these pigs that they have implanted these brain interfaces with. And so they were showing what they're able to sense and get from the pigs. But then in the clip, Musk is asked, do you think we'll actually be able to completely, download memories and implant memories, directly into the human consciousness? And he's like, yeah, I definitely think we will. I think that's a big leap. But I mean, this is contemporary stuff that's happening now in terms of people working hard to try to have an interface. And some of this too has to do with prosthetics. I mean, this is incredible. People who are completely paralyzed being able to use their brain, not just to grab something with a hook, but to actually articulate individual digits on a prosthetic limb. It's incredible stuff. I actually think I'm thinking of that first episode of In the Age of AI. But anyway, I will commend that to you as well and share that link. So we're going to have about 5 minutes. What I'm going to do is break us into two rooms and have a little table talk. And my challenge to you is to talk about this. What do you believe? Do you know about the origins of life and the nature of God? And we can talk a little bit about, where those beliefs and that knowledge comes from. So I'm going to stop our recording. And I'm muted. There we go. Welcome back, everyone, from Table Talk. I'll just wrap us up with a quick thought here. The worldviews of authors matter. I'm a big fan of C.S. Lewis and Narnia, of Tolkien and The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. But those guys were Christians, J.K. Rowling, and I love Harry Potter too, but she doesn't have any of that Christian belief undergirding, her whole series. There's now this TV series called His Dark Materials, and Philip Pullman is really, really kind of almost the antithesis of C.S. Lewis and Narnia. And it's it's important, I think, for us to recognize. I'm not saying we shouldn't be reading or watching any of these things, but I think we need to be aware of the beliefs and the worldviews of these authors and these scriptwriters. And I also just want to say, I think there's a lot of important work to be done by creative writers in terms of helping us grapple with some of these issues. And I'll also say that I think they have an important responsibility when it comes to truth and the presentation of truth. And I think, based on what we're hearing here from John Lennox, that, what is presented as scientific truth inside Dan Brown's book Origin really doesn't have that scientific basis. So, ta-da! There's our lesson for today. And I've gone over time just a little bit, but